Cockroach head. Cut off a cockroach's head, and here's the part nobody tells you: it doesn't die. It survives. The head itself can twitch its antennae, react to touch, and stay biologically active for hours, sometimes over a day, before finally running out of resources. Why does this happen? Cockroaches don't breathe through a mouth or nose. They breathe through small holes called spiracles lined along their entire body, meaning the head doesn't need lungs, a chest, or a heart to keep functioning. Its brain isn't even the main controller. Roaches operate on a decentralized nervous system, clusters of ganglia acting like backup brains scattered through the body, which is also why the headless body can still walk, run from danger, and react to stimulation for up to a week. The head simply starves to death eventually, not from lack of oxygen, but from lack of food and water it can no longer consume. Scientists have used this gruesome resilience to study neural activity in isolation, decapitated roach heads still responding to smell and light. It raises an uncomfortable question. If a head can think and react with no body attached, at what point does life actually end? Snakehead. A snakebite is supposed to end the moment the head is removed. It doesn't. Severed snakeheads have bitten people, injected venom, and triggered defensive strikes up to an hour after decapitation, sometimes longer. Reflex isn't the full story here. Reptiles have famously low metabolic demands, and their nervous system doesn't require constant oxygen flow the way a mammal's does. The disconnected head retains enough stored energy and neural function to detect movement, sense heat through specialized pits, and clamp down reflexively on anything that triggers it, venom glands still pressurized and ready to fire. Documented cases exist of people bitten and envenomated by heads they assumed were harmless, mistaking stillness for death. The mouth doesn't need conscious intent to strike. It only needs a nerve signal, and that signal can survive independently of blood flow for a surprisingly long window. Herpetologists now treat every decapitated venomous snake head as a live weapon, handling it with the same caution as an intact animal. The body, meanwhile, can continue writhing on its own, driven by spinal reflexes with nothing directing them. Two separate threats from one animal, both technically already dead. How long can something keep killing after it no longer exists? Octopus arm. An octopus doesn't have one brain controlling 8 arms. It has 9. 2/3 of its neurons live not in its head, but distributed through its arms, each one carrying enough processing power to taste, touch, and react entirely on its own. Sever an arm and it doesn't just twitch. It coordinates. Documented footage shows amputated octopus arms grabbing at food and attempting to move it toward where a mouth should be, a mouth that isn't even attached anymore. The arm doesn't know it's separated. It's still running its own local decision-making, still responding to chemical signals through the suckers that let it taste whatever it touches. This isn't simple reflex twitching like a chicken running without a head. This is semi-independent behavior, a limb solving problems with no central authority telling it what to do. Marine biologists studying this have started questioning what the octopus even means as a single entity, since each arm behaves like its own creature wearing the same skin. If an octopus loses an arm to a predator, that arm can survive and act for over an hour, buying the rest of the body time to escape. 9 minds, 1 animal. What does identity even mean to something built like that? Lizard tail. The tail comes off, and for a moment it doesn't stop moving. It thrashes, twitches, and jerks violently across the ground, completely unattached from the lizard that just sprinted away. This isn't damage. It's a deployed weapon called autotomy, a defense mechanism the lizard triggers on purpose, snapping its own tail off at a pre-fractured point in the vertebrae the instant a predator's jaws close in. The tail's job isn't to escape. It's to distract. Its violent, unpredictable movement powered by residual nerve signals and localized muscle spasms that can continue for several minutes after separation, long enough to convince a predator it's still watching prey. While the tail performs its final act, the actual lizard is already gone. Some species can regrow the tail entirely within weeks, though the replacement is usually shorter, built from cartilage instead of bone, a permanent scar of survival. The original nerve tissue never fully regenerates, meaning the new tail is, in a sense, a lesser copy pretending to be the original. The lizard trades a piece of its own spine just to buy seconds of life. What would you sacrifice from your own body if it meant walking away alive? Starfish arm. Cut a single arm off a starfish, and depending on the species, that arm doesn't die. It walks away and becomes an entirely new starfish. Starfish don't have a centralized brain. Instead, they run on a decentralized nerve ring and radial nerves stretched through each limb, meaning every arm carries a partial copy of the whole nervous system. If enough of the central disc survives attached to that severed arm, it can regenerate the missing 4 limbs and organs from scratch, effectively cloning the original animal from a single fragment. Some species have been documented deliberately splitting their own bodies apart to reproduce this way, a slow-motion act of self-destruction that produces life instead of death. The detached arm doesn't experience this as trauma. Its scattered nervous tissue simply keeps functioning, crawling using tiny tube feet still receiving signals, hunting for food it no longer has the organs to properly digest, until regeneration catches up. This process can take up to a year. Marine researchers have watched fragments survive for months as nothing more than a moving limb with ambition. It isn't injury. It's the beginning of an entirely new organism. How many of us could survive being torn apart if the pieces just kept going? Planarian worm fragments slice a planarian worm into pieces, and every single piece survives. Not most. Every fragment, however small, regenerates into a fully independent, complete worm within roughly 2 weeks. This isn't limited regeneration like a lizard's tail. Planarians carry populations of adult stem cells called neoblasts distributed evenly through their entire body, cells capable of becoming literally any tissue type needed: brain, gut, reproductive organs, skin. Cut a worm into 20 pieces and you don't get 20 dying fragments. You get 20 new worms, each one growing a fully functional brain from nothing but a scrap of tissue that used to be a tail or a midsection. Scientists have taken this further, transplanting a fragment's head onto a different worm's body, and found the resulting hybrid can retain and recall trained behaviors from the original, memory apparently distributed outside the brain itself, stored in the body's own cells. Cut off a planarian's head entirely and the headless piece will regrow a brand new head, complete with eyes, within days. There is functionally no upper limit to how many times this animal can be divided and still come back whole. Biologists still don't fully understand where the memory lives. If you can't destroy the mind by destroying the brain, what does death even mean for something like this? Hydra body fragment. A hydra is a small freshwater organism that, for all practical purposes, cannot be killed by cutting. Slice it into fragments and each piece reorganizes its own cells and regrows into a complete, independent hydra within days. Its body is built almost entirely from stem cells that never stop dividing, never age in the conventional sense, and constantly replace themselves in a cycle that shows no biological signs of slowing down or stopping. Researchers have kept hydra populations alive in laboratories for decades without observing senescence, the normal aging decline every other studied animal eventually experiences. Turn a hydra inside out, and it survives, simply reorganizing its tissue layers back into a functioning structure. Grind sections of it apart and scatter the cells, and under the right conditions those disassociated cells can reaggregate and rebuild an entire organism from what was essentially biological debris. This isn't wound healing. This is a creature with no fixed upper boundary on how much damage it can absorb and still return, whole, questioning nothing, remembering nothing, simply continuing. Scientists studying immortality in aging research keep returning to this animal because it appears to have solved the problem entirely by accident. What does a species that doesn't know how to die tell us about the ones that do? Sea cucumber ejected organs. When a sea cucumber feels threatened, it doesn't run. It disembowels itself on purpose. Through a defense mechanism called evisceration, it violently ejects its own internal organs, intestines, respiratory structures, sometimes reproductive tissue, out through its anus or through ruptures in its own body wall, launching a sticky toxic tangle at the predator behind it. The organs themselves aren't inert. Some remain adhesive and actively entangling, sticking to a predator's mouth or limbs, while others release toxins that deter further attack, all of this happening from tissue no longer connected to a living, directing body. The sea cucumber, now hollowed out and missing a significant portion of its internal anatomy, crawls away. And then it simply regrows everything it just lost: intestines, respiratory trees, and connective tissue rebuilt from scratch within 1 to 5 weeks, depending on species and water temperature. This isn't a rare, desperate last resort. Some species do this repeatedly throughout their lives as a routine survival strategy, treating their own guts as a disposable, renewable weapon. There is no other animal known to weaponize its own digestive system this deliberately. What kind of survival instinct decides that giving up your organs is the safer option? Salamander limb. Cut off a salamander's leg, and within weeks it grows back. Not a scar, not a stump. A fully functional limb, complete with bone, muscle, nerves, blood vessels and skin, indistinguishable in most respects from the original. This is the gold standard of vertebrate regeneration, and scientists still don't fully understand every mechanism behind it. At the wound site, mature cells actually reverse their own specialization, a process called dedifferentiation, essentially forgetting what kind of cell they used to be and reforming into a mass called a blastema, a cluster of building block cells that then redifferentiates into exactly the tissue types needed to rebuild the missing limb, guided by chemical signals the salamander's body still remembers how to send. Some species can regenerate not just limbs but portions of their heart, spinal cord, and even parts of their eyes, tissue that in humans causes permanent, irreversible damage when destroyed. Researchers studying regenerative medicine study salamanders obsessively for this exact reason, hoping to unlock the same dormant genetic instructions in human cells. The salamander isn't special because it heals. It's special because some part of its body never stopped knowing how to become anything again. What is it about us that forgot? Crab claw. A crab under threat will tear off its own claw and leave it behind, still snapping, still moving, as a decoy while the rest of its body scrambles away. This deliberate self-amputation is called autotomy, triggered at a specific breakage point in the limb called a fracture plane, where the crab can voluntarily sever the connection with minimal blood loss thanks to a membrane that seals the wound almost instantly. The detached claw doesn't go still. Residual nerve activity keeps it clamping open and shut for minutes afterward, sometimes still gripping tightly onto whatever it caught mid-escape, a final reflex fired off with no animal left to command it. Some predators, distracted by the still active claw, lose track of the crab entirely, giving it just enough time to disappear into the sand. The crab isn't finished after this. Across a series of molts, it slowly regrows the missing claw, rebuilding it in stages until it's nearly identical in size and strength to the one it sacrificed. Some crabs will do this repeatedly across a lifetime, treating a piece of their own body as an expendable tool rather than a permanent part of themselves. It's not injury. It's strategy. What does it say about survival that giving away a piece of yourself is sometimes the smartest move you can make? Subscribe for more interesting stuff. Tell us your experience in the comments.